Hi everyone, please make sure to watch this video to the end because this is super important. This video is not designed to scare you. It's designed because I believe that being forewarned is forearmed, and I so wish I'd have had all of this information before I started on my own breastfeeding journey. So my first experience with breastfeeding was as a first-time mother in the UK, and so that's my point of reference. But I would be really interested to hear from any of you with experiences from other places around the world. Drop me a comment below. When I was pregnant, my husband and I joined a prenatal class. I won't name them here, but I would say probably the most popular paid prenatal classes in the UK. As part of this course, there was an extra optional workshop specifically about breastfeeding. And at the time, I had no strong feelings about how I was going to feed my baby. I just wanted more information. What I can say is that this workshop was not a carefully balanced giving of information to parents. It was a one-sided assault campaign of why breast is best, how to breastfeed, and why no other options should be considered. And I distinctly remember two things from this workshop that demonstrate that. So firstly, we went round the circle and we're forced to give our feelings about breastfeeding. Sensing the tone early on, most people simply said that they wanted to do it. But I was a little bit more open and I said, you know, I kind of want to do it, but right now I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I know that's what my breasts are for, but at the moment it just feels really weird imagining it. Well, to say my concern was quickly dismissed and moved on from would be an understatement. Then, towards the end of the session, another woman asked, I want to try breastfeeding, but if for any reason it's not right for me, it's not working out, is there any formula that you would consider better than any others? Can you guess the reply already? I will not have any discussions about formula. Breast is best. Now, I'm not saying every workshop of that company would have been the same. Perhaps it was an instructor, but I do think her attitude is indicative of many in the UK right now. But here's what I feel the two biggest problems that I was left with after that session. One, anyone considering formula for any reason was shamed. And two, breastfeeding was presented with these full rose-tinted glasses so that when difficulties arose, cluster feeding, cracked nipples, societal judgment, I'll come on to all of those, I was completely ill prepared for them. Had I known in advance, I would have still chosen to breastfeed, but God, I would have appreciated the heads up so I could prepare myself. But let's start by looking at why is there such a focus on encouraging breastfeeding? And again, this is fairly UK centric. So a study in 2016, and the references are all cited in the description below, showed that the UK has some of, if not the worst statistics for breastfeeding in the world. And that's not only in terms of babies breastfed at all from birth, but most importantly in terms of how many babies are still being breastfed, either exclusively or receiving some formula after certain periods of time, such as a week, 6 months, or after their first birthday. The 2010 Infant Feeding Survey gives us some further statistics that 81% of mums in the UK tried to breastfeed their newborns at birth, but by the end of the first week, over half of those babies had some degree of formula. Across the UK, at 3 months, the number of mothers breastfeeding exclusively was 17%, and at 4 months, it dropped further to 12%. Exclusively breastfeeding at 6 months remained at 1%. But here's what I think is the most significant. How many people tried and stopped? To not try is one thing. You've chosen formula as the right thing for you. Great. But to try and stop means something made you stop. And as a part of this study, many, if not most women who had stopped breastfeeding said it was not because they objectively and rationally wanted to, it's because there was a reason they felt they had to. Now, if and when you feel your breastfeeding journey has come to an end or doesn't start in the first place, is a completely personal decision for you and your family. But it absolutely should not be for the reasons below that I wanted to share with you so that you can be prepared. So here are the breastfeeding challenges I personally faced. Number one, the expectation that baby will feed every 3 hours, 15 minutes on each boob, and 30 minutes in total. So as you'll know from my other videos, if you've watched them, I didn't know a lot of theories and terminology at the time as a new parent. I just went with what felt right. What I know now is that I fed on demand. When my baby showed signs of hunger or discomfort, I fed her. And I fed her for as long as she wanted to feed. She fell asleep, no problem. So particularly in the newborn days, that could be every hour for an hour or every 2 hours for 20 minutes. Whilst I did it because it felt right, it caused me such untold stress She's fallen asleep after just one boob, but do I need to wake her up for the other? She fed for an hour, so do I count the next feed in 2 hours or 3 hours? And this self-doubt wasn't helped by other people, particularly those of an older generation or without kids, with comments such as, she can't possibly be hungry again, you should wait to feed her. And the worst thing being that sometimes when other people are around, I actually fought my natural instincts to feed her for fear of this judgment. So where on earth did this idea of every 3 hours come from? Well, firstly, it's a guideline of the maximum amount of time a baby should go without a feed in the newborn days to make sure they're getting enough milk in those crucial early days. But please, after you finish watching this video, go and read the article that I've linked below from UNICEF, which is titled The Dangerous Obsession with the Infant Feeding Interval. Baby feeding more often than every 3 hours, and particularly cluster feeding, led on to other related problems that I hadn't expected. So 2, concern that you don't have enough milk. I've heard so many women say they stopped feeding because their baby was so hungry and they knew they weren't producing enough milk, which sadly comes back to this unfounded rhetoric that if you're producing enough milk, baby will only need to feed every 3 hours. And let me stress it again, we're talking about feeding, not even that they like feeding for comfort. It can also be painful as your breasts adjust, and not just for 6 weeks. The way breastfeeding is talked about in the UK is as if the first 6 weeks are a little tough and then poof, as long as you make it past 6 weeks, it is all plain sailing from there. We're also told it shouldn't be painful unless there's a problem. Well, let me tell you, I had pain, a lot of it, for about 12 weeks. You know how you might think that things might get a little sore with someone sucking on your nipple 10 hours a day for 12 weeks? Well, it was. But of course, I'd been told it shouldn't hurt, so there must be a problem. 2 very expensive lactation consultants later, checking my latch, checking for tongue tie, checking if I had thrush. Later, no problem is identified, and guess what? It did stop hurting. I honestly believe my nipples just had to toughen up, which they did, but it was not magic at 6 weeks. It is also emotionally draining and physically limiting. As I got more confident, feeding out and about became easier, but those early weeks where I'd be sitting on the sofa feeding for hours on end, tough. Again, people will talk to you about how they sat watching series after series whilst their baby fed. And to be fair, I did enjoy that. But there were also evenings, particularly when my little girl would cluster feed for 4 hours straight, that would drain me physically and emotionally. And of course, unless you pump and use a bottle, it's all on you. So it can feel isolating from your partner, who simply can't do that bit for you, even sometimes to give you a break. And lastly, I faced the challenge of feeling uncomfortable when feeding in public. When I say public, I think it's important to note what I really mean. That's in front of other people, and that included certain members of my own family in family homes. My mum herself apparently used to take herself off somewhere private and alone every time she fed us, even amongst family. And she expressed how surprising she found it that I didn't. There was a bit of a subliminal message there. And in more public places, such as restaurants, what should be just natural and a non-issue often felt like I was being defiant and proving a point that I was feeding in public. And this is in the same country that is trying to encourage more breastfeeding. General opinion in the UK is still one that showing breasts in a TV show sexually is fine, but just imagine a woman feeding her baby in public. And here are some other challenges that weren't personal to me, but I think are important to be expected. You never wanted to breastfeed in the first place and felt pressure to do so. As I said, that wasn't the case for me. In the end, I ended up wanting to breastfeed, but there is a terrible, terrible shame surrounding formula in the UK. So you're probably currently thinking, well, why on earth should I breastfeed? It sounds awful, and that is absolutely not my intention. As I said at the beginning, these are just all the things I wish I had known to prepare. Would I still choose to breastfeed again? Absolutely, I loved it. I did with my second, but even I probably would have quit in the first 6 weeks if I wasn't so stubborn and didn't want to tell people I was quitting. But here's why I'm so glad I stuck it out. And if you are having a tough time, I encourage you to. Here are the benefits of breastfeeding. There is an emotional connection that I don't know I could ever do justice in words. Those moments with my daughter are truly some of the best memories of my parental journey to date. Despite my hesitancy before starting, it only ever felt natural and right from that perspective. Secondly, once I was more confident, it made my life so much easier when out and about. I didn't have to worry about how much formula to pack, getting access to hot water. We even did a huge trip around Canada when my first was 5 months old. That would have been infinitely more complicated carrying formula around. 3, whilst I believe fed is best, there is no denying that breast milk is pretty miraculous. Its nutrients boost the baby's immune system, and the fact that it even changes depending on what baby is lacking or needing is pretty amazing. And it's free. Let's face it, babies are expensive, so that is at least one thing off the list. Whatever choice you make is yours and yours alone, but if breastfeeding is your choice, then I really hope this video was helpful. Please, if you have any more questions, drop me a message below or share your experience. Were you a breastfeeding mother? Did you continue? Did you have any difficulties? Did you feel like you had to stop? I think this is a really important discussion and I hope you'll join me in it. Thanks everyone.